6 innings of dominant pitching. A lead protected. A performance that had the Dodgers' dugout relaxed and the opposing lineup frustrated, and the sold-out crowd already writing the headline in their heads. Shohei Ohtani walked off that mound having done everything a starting pitcher is supposed to do. He gave his team the lead. He gave his bullpen a cushion. He gave the scoreboard a story that should have ended cleanly, with his name attached to a win and another entry in what is becoming one of the most quietly historic pitching seasons in modern baseball. Then Jack Dreyer walked out of the bullpen. And in the space of one inning, one brutal, unraveling, 2-run inning that nobody in that stadium saw coming, the win disappeared. The cushion collapsed. The story changed completely. Dreyer did not intend for it to happen. No pitcher walks to the mound intending to give up the runs that cost his teammate a victory. But intention is not the currency baseball trades in. Results are. And the result, when Dreyer walked back to the dugout, was that Shohei Ohtani, who had thrown 6 innings of near-perfect baseball, was no longer in line for the win. What happened next is what the American media could not stop talking about. Not the runs. Not the bullpen failure. Not the tactical question of whether the pitching change came too late or too early or whether the matchup was wrong from the beginning. What the media could not stop talking about was what Ohtani said to Dreyer after it happened. And what catcher Smith Rojas revealed about the moment that nobody in the stadium saw. Before the moment can be understood, the pressure surrounding it has to be felt. Jack Dreyer is not a veteran reliever with a decade of high-leverage experience behind him. He is a pitcher building his career in one of the most scrutinized environments in professional sports, the Dodgers bullpen, in a pennant race, behind a starting pitcher whose performances have become national events. When Ohtani starts, the crowd does not simply attend a baseball game. They attend an occasion. The energy in that stadium during an Ohtani start has a specific quality that veteran baseball observers have noted repeatedly this season: a collective attentiveness, a heightened investment in every pitch, a sense that something worth witnessing is actively unfolding. That energy, which works entirely in Ohtani's favor while he is on the mound, becomes something different for the pitcher who replaces him. Because the moment Ohtani walks to the dugout, the crowd's investment does not disappear, it transfers. It transforms into the particular anxiety of watching someone try to protect something precious. Every reliever who has entered a game behind Ohtani this season has felt that transfer. The weight of the crowd's expectations shifting from celebration to protective vigilance in the span of a pitching change. Dreyer felt it. And for one inning, the weight was too much. The 2 runs that scored were not the result of catastrophic pitching. There was no single moment of obvious failure, no pitch left over the heart of the plate, no walk that opened the floodgates in a way that should have been avoided. It was the accumulation of small things that baseball pitchers know better than anyone: a pitch that caught slightly more of the zone than intended, a hitter who made an adjustment, a ball that found a gap just wide enough. 2 runs. A lead erased. A win that had been Ohtani's, earned across 6 innings of work, was gone. And in the dugout, Dreyer sat with what had happened. There is a specific silence that follows a bullpen implosion in a game where the starter had done everything right. It is not the silence of a team that has given up. It is the silence of a team processing a particular kind of collective disappointment, one that includes, for the reliever at the center of it, a private devastation that is difficult to describe to anyone who has not experienced it professionally. Dreyer had walked into a situation that was as favorable as a reliever can inherit. Lead intact. Crowd behind the team. Ohtani's performance providing momentum that should have carried into the late innings. The job, in the bluntest terms, was simply not to undo what had been done. When the job does not get done, when the runs score and the lead evaporates and the starter's win disappears, the reliever carries something back to the dugout that does not fit neatly into any statistical category. Guilt is too simple a word. Responsibility is more accurate, but still incomplete. What Dreyer carried back to that dugout was the specific weight of knowing that his failure had cost someone else something they had genuinely earned. Not just a win. Ohtani's win. In Ohtani's season. In front of that crowd, in that moment, after that performance. The dugout around him processed it the way baseball dugouts process these things, through movement, through preparation for the next inning, through the practiced professional discipline of not allowing one inning to become two. But Dreyer was sitting with something that the team's forward movement could not immediately resolve. And then Ohtani walked over. What Ohtani said to Dreyer has been described by multiple people who were in or near that dugout. The specific wording has been reported differently across different outlets, which is normal when a private moment becomes public knowledge through multiple sources, but the substance of what was communicated has remained consistent across every account. Ohtani did not console Dreyer the way a teammate performs consolation for a camera. He did not put an arm around him and say something generic about tomorrow being another day and these things happen and the team is still in this. What Ohtani said was specific. It was directed at Dreyer as a pitcher and as a person, not as a role on a roster that had just failed to execute. He acknowledged what had happened without minimizing it, without the false reassurance that sometimes passes for support but actually communicates the opposite, that the person receiving it is too fragile for honesty. And then he said something that, according to the accounts that have circulated through American media, reframed the entire conversation. The precise words belong to that dugout. But the meaning of them, the thing that traveled from that private moment into every sports broadcast and baseball podcast and media conversation over the following days, was this: Ohtani was not thinking about the win. He was thinking about Dreyer. Not as a strategic concern. Not as a morale management exercise performed by a veteran player who understands that a confident bullpen is in his competitive interest. But as a genuine human response from one professional to another who was sitting with something heavy, in a very public place, with no obvious way to set it down. American media, which has covered Ohtani's statistics and his records and his contract and his cultural impact with exhaustive thoroughness, found itself somewhat unprepared for this version of the story. Because the version of Shohei Ohtani that generates the most coverage is the version that produces historically significant performances and breaks records and earns comparisons to the greatest players who have ever lived. The version that walks across a dugout after losing a win he had genuinely earned, and says something specific and human to the pitcher who cost him that win, without any cameras positioned for it and without any evident calculation behind it, that version requires a different kind of attention. And the media gave it that attention. Because the comment, once it circulated, raised a question that statistics cannot answer. What kind of person does something like that? Catcher Smith Rojas sees things that nobody else in the stadium sees. That is the nature of the position, physically located at the center of every pitch, every sign, every moment of communication between the pitcher and the game plan. The catcher is the only player on the field who faces toward the entire field of play, who sees the pitcher's face and the batter's stance simultaneously, who knows what pitch is coming before anyone else and watches what happens in real time. Rojas had been behind the plate for all 6 of Ohtani's innings. He had received every pitch. He had seen the command, felt the velocity in his glove, watched hitter after hitter fail to solve what Ohtani was putting on the plate. He had experienced the performance from the closest possible distance. And after Dreyer's 2 runs scored, after the dugout processed what had happened, Rojas revealed something about the dynamic between himself and Ohtani that added another dimension to the story American media was already trying to fully understand. What Rojas described was the quality of communication between them throughout those 6 innings. Not the pitch selection, that has been analyzed thoroughly by people with access to the data. What Rojas described was something underneath the pitch selection. The way Ohtani takes the sign not as a directive but as a starting point for a conversation that happens in real time, adjusting based on what Rojas sees in the hitter's setup, in the timing of their stride, in the micro-adjustments they make between pitches that a catcher positioned behind the plate is uniquely placed to observe. This communication, which happens in gestures and adjustments and the shared vocabulary of 2 professionals who have built trust through repetition, is part of what produced those 6 innings. The pitch selection was not simply Ohtani executing a pre-game plan against a scouting report. It was Ohtani and Rojas reading the game together, in real time, making adjustments that no scouting report could fully anticipate. Rojas revealed this not to claim credit for the performance. He revealed it because the question he was answering, about what makes Ohtani special as a pitcher, beyond the pure mechanics that analysts like Randy Johnson have broken down, pointed towards something that the catcher is best positioned to describe. Ohtani listens, Rojas said. During the game, in the moments between pitches when most of the communication is happening, Ohtani processes what Rojas gives him and incorporates it. He is not simply executing his own plan against an opposition lineup. He is in a genuine collaboration, with the person closest to the information, adjusting and recalibrating in real time. That quality, that specific willingness to remain open to incoming information even while performing at the highest level, is what Rojas identified as the thing that separates Ohtani from other elite pitchers he has worked with. And it is, he noted, the same quality that Ohtani demonstrated when he walked across the dugout to talk to Dreyer. The capacity to be present for the person in front of him. Not the situation. Not the implications. Not the narrative that the media would construct around what had just happened. The person. The conversation that followed Dreyer's revelation and Rojas's account did not stay in the sports section. It traveled. It traveled into conversations about leadership and professionalism and the difference between performing those qualities for an audience and actually possessing them. It traveled into broader discussions about what athletic greatness looks like when it is accompanied by the kind of character that does not require a camera to activate. Several prominent voices in American sports media noted that the most revealing thing about the entire episode was the absence of any visible calculation in Ohtani's response. He did not wait to see who was watching. He did not time the moment for maximum visibility. He simply responded to a person who was sitting with something difficult, but a player who loses a win he earned, walks across a dugout, and says something specific and human to the person who cost him that win, without calculation, without performance, without any of the apparatus that athletes in his position sometimes use to manage their public image. That player is something rarer than statistically exceptional. Dreyer did not immediately go public with what Ohtani said to him. That is consistent with the culture of a clubhouse that does not routinely broadcast its internal moments. But when he did speak, carefully, and with evident thought about how to describe what had happened without reducing it to a sound bite, what he said confirmed everything that the American media had been trying to articulate through the accounts of others. He said that in the moment he felt worst about what had happened, when the weight of it was most present and the dugout was moving forward in the way baseball dugouts always move forward while the individual sits with the specific thing they are carrying. In that moment, Ohtani made it smaller. Not by dismissing it. Not by pretending the win did not matter or that the runs were not meaningful. But by placing the moment in a context that was larger than the result. By communicating, without making a speech about it, that what he valued was not separable from what Dreyer was worth as a person and a teammate. The win was gone. The moment in the dugout remained. What this story produced, when all of its pieces were assembled, Dreyer's revelation, Rojas's account, the American media's response, and Ohtani's unrehearsed moment in the dugout, was something that the 6 innings of scoreless baseball alone could not have produced. A complete picture of a player. The performance is one dimension. The mechanics are another. The records and the statistics and the historical comparisons are real and significant and worth the attention they receive. But the dimension that Dreyer's story added, the one that Rojas's account illuminated from behind the plate, is the dimension that makes the other dimensions make sense. Because a player who prepares the way Ohtani prepares, who performs the way Ohtani performs, who maintains the routine and the standard and the focus that everyone around him has described in consistent terms all season, that player has built something internally that shows up not only in the ERA and the strikeout rate and the splitter that nobody can hit. It shows up in a dugout, after a loss, when nobody is watching, in a conversation that was never meant to become a story. The win was gone. What Ohtani said remained. And somehow, that turned out to matter more.